Greetings, Jeepers. What we're going to work on today is rebuilding this Ross steering box from this 2A. And what we're going to do first of all is insert these bushings. So there are two bushings. As you can see from that angle, one is longer than the other. So the long one goes on the long side of the steering box, and then the shorter one will go on this side of the steering box. This one you just want to pound in flush with the rim of the hole, and the long one we'll pound in a little deeper because you can see that there's a little lip there, and on top of that lip we will put a seal. And the seal looks like that, nothing fancy about it at all. And once we get this long bushing in there down onto that lip, we'll place this seal on. Say the tapered end will face up and the sharp end of the seal will sit on top of the bushing on that lip.
Put the longer bushing onto this outer part of the steering box and try pound it in square.
What we've used here to get that bushing in there is a 15/16 socket. We just turned it over and just pounded it in. And you can't go any further than making it flush because the socket doesn't go past lip in there. So I think we got it set here quite nicely. So now we're going to put the shorter bushing in, the opposite side.
Big socket technique again.
And what you want to do is make that flush. And we had to ream it out. You can do that if you have a hand reamer, which I didn't, so I just took it to a machine shop here in the city, and they reamed those bushings out so that the sector shaft slides in quite nicely and is a fairly snug fit. Also with these bushings, one thing to keep in mind, inside the Ross steering box there's a hole here, and that hole extends into where the sector shaft sits. And you got to make sure that that hole is free, that it isn't covered by these bushings. If it is, in this case it's not, you'll need to just drill them out so that the hole is free, so you can get lube from within the box into the bushings.
Finally, it is time to install our sector shaft oil seal onto our Ross steering box. And your oil seal will be placed on the portion of your steering box where your sector shaft will be coming out of your steering box and connected to your pitman arm. And to install your oil seal is actually very simple. You want to have it so the flat metal portion is sticking out towards you guys, and this metal lip is facing inwards or towards the bushing. Line it up squarely, and now we will get a soft face mallet and lightly tap in our oil seal until it becomes flush with the top of your Ross steering box. The oil seal is now seated all the way down into its location where its sector shaft will be coming out of your Ross steering box. And now we can get to installing the rest of our steering box.
The first thing that we're going to have to do here is set frost. They call it frost plug, but it's a plug that sits right in this position. And to do that, we're first going to apply some Right Stuff Permatex gasket maker. So we're just going right around the inside of where that plug is going to seat. Now this 1 1/4 OD plug will just set right in there on top of the Right Stuff. Then you'll need a punch. Put that on top of the plug in the middle and give it a couple good blows, and what that will do is expand the plug so that it seats. So now you can see we just hammered that in a little bit and it expanded the plug. And now we're just going to apply a little bit of Right Stuff around the outside.
Once you apply your right stuff, gasket maker, to your frost plug here, just smear it out so you make a good seal. And same with the inside too. Just use your finger and just make sure the gasket sealer is smeared and it's fully covered all the cracks so your steering box won't leak. Now it is time to install our steering box bearings. So you want to install our cup facing this way. So we're going to stick it into our steering box and seat it into that groove at the very bottom. It can just be pushed in and it will push and seat all the way down to the bottom. And now we have our bearing, and you want to have it so your bearings are riding in your cup. So your bearings will have to be installed this way, facing downwards. Slide our bearings and our cup onto our worm gear all the way to the end. And we want to make sure we install our bearings in the right orientation. So you want to have, so the bearings are facing outwards or towards your shredded part, and the more plastic part facing towards the other part of your worm gear. And your cup here will just sit on like that, and your bearings will ride in the cup like that. So now we will slide these two components onto our worm gear facing this direction, and just slide them onto your worm gear, pushing them all the way back and make sure the bearings don't fall out. Next, slide on your cup here, and you want your cup facing this way so the bearings ride in your cup, and it goes all the way onto your worm gear as well. In addition, make sure you install your steering box top cover onto your worm gear in this orientation, so these bolts can be bolted onto your steering box, and it just slides on as well all the way to the back here. Here's a closer view of these three components: your steering box top cover, your cup, and your bearings here. And the bearings will just seat onto the end of your worm gear here. Just kind of push over this lip like that, and then we'll go your cup on top, and then we'll push on our top cover. Now with our bearings, we have to install our bearings onto our worm gear at the very bottom here, and make sure they're in the right direction. So you have the balls facing downwards or towards the bottom of your worm gear, and just slide them onto your worm gear like that. It'll fit in this little groove, and just make sure none of your balls fall out of this plastic housing, as you don't want to lose any of these bearings.
So now what we want to make sure that you get your shims on before you put the worm tube into the steering box. This is kind of a over and over process, and there's packs you can get. There are various thicknesses, and I have done this numerous times here with this steering box to fit them properly. The whole reason of these shims is that when you tighten the worm gear at the top, you don't want any play in the worm gear itself. So that's the purpose of these shims. It may take you a few times to get these shims the right thickness so that there is no up and down movement in this worm gear. So you eliminate as much slop as you can by getting these shims tight to the box.
Once you have your worm gear installed into your raw steering box, I would put on your 3 screws that hold your top mounting plate, just to hold all the bearings and your worm gear in place. Now it's time to install our 7/8 sector shaft into our raw steering box, and we'll just push your sector shaft through the bushings and the seals that have already been installed into your steering box. Push your sector shaft through your bushings and your seal. It should be a snug fit, and it will just push all the way in until you get into the grooves of your worm gear. It is important that we center our sector shaft, so we don't want your sector shaft to be too much to the left or to the right. You want it to be dead center with your steering box, And a quick trick to do this is just to make a mark on your raw steering box and your sector shaft so you know that your sector shaft is straight when your steering box is fully assembled and the cover is on. With an even coat of gasket sealer on, now we will install our steering box gasket, and you want to have it so the gasket is facing this direction because it only goes one direction. Just push it on, and now you will put gasket number 2 sealer on top of your gasket before you put the cover on. Make sure that you put some aerobic gasket maker on all these 4 bolts that will hold on your cover for your raw steering box, because you don't want your steering box oil to seep through the threads of the bolts, and we want less oil leaks the better. So just put a little bit on each of these bolts. Don't want too much, but it's a nice good coating. Now with your raw steering box side cover, we will install it onto the side of your steering box, and you want to have it so this flat end is towards the top and it all lines up with your gasket and the bolts. Now you just press it on, and now you have to line up the bolts, and you want the bolts that have your brass washers to be on the bottom of your steering box, and the 2 top bolts will just be normal lock washers, and the small brass washer looks like that. Push them through all the holes with your gasket maker on each bolt. Once you have all your 4 bolts securing your cover to your raw steering box, we will now torque these bolts, and you want to torque them to approximately 15 foot-pounds. Now we're going to loosen these screws that are holding on our top cover here with a good amount of your aerobic gasket maker on these 3 bolts. We'll have your bolt and your good old-fashioned lock washer, and we'll put all 3 of these in the top cover and just line it up and thread all 3 of your bolts. Once you have your 3 bolts kind of hand tight, you can torque these bolts, and we'll go to about 10 to 15 foot-pounds. That is how you fully rebuild your Ross steering box.